Welcome to the first in a four-part conversation series. I'm Norman Blissett, Managing Director of Gallanach and Chair of Cyclopark, and over this series I'll be in conversation with Paul Tuohy about how our respective charity boards and management teams have responded to the COVID crisis. Paul has just stepped down as CEO of national cycling charity Cycling UK and has many years of leading charities. In this first part, we talk about how we assess the strength of the foundations of our organisations in the early days of lockdown. I asked Paul how he made this assessment at Cycling UK.
Well, you can come at it from a few different reasons. Obviously, in the absolute presence is the issue of COVID, but actually, just to start with, I thought it would be useful, Norman, if we just talk about life post that, because hopefully we might be moving back to some sort of normality at some point. We don't know what the new normal will be. But in our organisations, I still think that there are traits and strengths and weaknesses that you have to look at, and that sometimes they can be exposed through something that's just happened, like COVID-19. But from my experience, there's still some real fundamental basics that organisations need to look at and do a health check on, just to sort of understand that everybody's on the same page. And I try and sort of break it down for myself into sort of like a triangle of the board, the executive, the staff, the stakeholders, and it all sort of has a sort of cyclical churn in that, in terms of how you operate, communicate, and deliver what you do. And I know, when as a chief executive of Cycling UK for 6 years, when I started there in that role, as the Cyclist Touring Club, what was interesting was the fracturing of people understanding what the charity was or what it was there for. There was a real misalignment of messaging from the board, which then cascades into the team and to the stakeholders, and it kind of needed a sort of glue. And sometimes with those analogies, you almost have to break it and glue it back together again to get the pieces you want. So that. But once we with the board had worked out fundamentally what it was that this organisation was doing, what its charitable purpose really was, then you really opened the doors to then allow that to cascade down through to a really good plan that you could communicate through to the team and the stakeholders. But I mean, I found this in other charities that I was at. I was at a charity a while ago as CEO, Missing People, that people will know. That used to be the National Missing Persons Helpline, which was rebranded to Missing People. And the same thing happened there. I remember we ended up having an away day with the entire staff. It was a 2-day away day. And I remember on day one, and we had a charity consultant, a HR advisor like yourself, in with helping us on it. But I remember after day one, I had my head in my hands. I was just like, we were all over the place. It was like we just were really struggling. We were doing the breakout groups, and we were coming back, and you could sense at the end of day one the frustrations creeping in, and the anxiety. Everything was there because we were struggling. And then something happened, because we were doing this whole away day as the National Missing Persons Helpline, and I think that what happened was the recognition that the charity was a lot more than just a helpline, and that led to the opening of the doors into being the charity for missing people and encompassing all of that. And then suddenly the energy and the frustrations could channel into a positive energy, and we suddenly started on day two to absolutely smash through with a real vibrance amongst them. And I was, the relief was palpable because when you're leading an organisation, there's a lot of pressure that you do feel it. And so did my executive. But we came out, all of us, on an absolute high. But again, it's like going back to basics and sometimes understanding. And then, obviously in doing that, you realise the strengths and weaknesses, and you realise the resilience that you might need as an organisation. Because some organisations will just trundle along without really taking a very close look at those fundamental issues. What are we here for? What are we being judged on? What are our KPIs? Really, really simple questions which sometimes need a facilitator like yourself to help bring out. Sometimes it's much harder for me as a chief executive to do that, and it's really good having, if you like, a neutral expert in there with a wider skill sets that can actually help tease that out as well.
Yeah, I think I should say apologies for the drilling that's going on.
Yeah, that's okay.
You can't hear it. The
viewers won't be able to hear it, hopefully.
There's the dangers of the or the risks of doing these sort of things. But yeah, I completely agree. I don't think you can see organisational resilience as a separate thing. I think it is, it's the whole of the organisation, and if the whole of the organisation is not focused on the primary purpose, and I think particularly thinking about it from a charity perspective, it's what are you there to do? What's the most important thing that you're doing that makes a difference for your beneficiaries? And that seems to me to be the starting point for every discussion. And if you're not clear about that, then
but when you've had I've been at away days, and I'm sure many people watching would have been through similar scenarios, but when that question is asked, what are we here to do? You could get 10 different answers. And it could be that you should be doing 8 of them, and that's why I think our organisations actually doing enough, what I call getting off the hamster wheel and taking that time. Is it mapped out in the course of a year of their planning cycle to have that together time where that communication is really, really straightforward and that people understand what it is and where they fit in? I mean, I think one of the great things at Cycling UK was that when we did that 5-year plan, it was really everybody could understand the way the directors cascaded the objectives down into their departments with a team approach, and then and where there was crossover as well. People understood and got what their role was within the strategy. So everyone should understand what part they have to play.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost some. I think they see it's just an exec thing, board exec thing, and then they come down and tell you what to do. And I think that's poor management and poor governance. I think good management and good governance is when you can walk the floor in your organisation and say to somebody, what is it you do with your role? Right, okay, how does that work in your strategy? And that they can actually answer it. I think that's a litmus test.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, it comes back to that, the word that I like to use all the way through this is purpose. So what's your purpose that you have in your role? And is that when people explain their purpose and their role, that links to the ultimate benefit that you're bringing to your beneficiaries, whoever they are. I'm interested. So I suppose the answer that we're coming to, or the conclusion that we're coming to there, is that you can't have organisational resilience without a really good sense of the purpose of the organisation, and then you can build the resilience around that. Just thinking about some of the very practical things that you have experienced and done at times of crisis to be able to test out, because I think one of the things that I know from my position as chair of Cyclopark, charity Cyclopark, is that we're very clear about our purpose, but when COVID hit, it was more about, but can we exist? Are we going to be able to exist and test out our ability to cope with a number of different scenarios? So I just wonder what your experience of that is. Maybe not just over the last few months, but in previous charities. Because I know you've come in as chief executive organisations that sometimes been in distress or needed significant change.
Certainly a Mentor drug and alcohol prevention charity. When I came into that one, they had a £50,000-60,000 debt I mean, that was it. They were in debt. There was no reserves. They were in debt. And so the brief was, can you close it down for us, because we don't really not really sure how to do that properly, or if you can you buy some time to see whether we can build it back up again? And of course, we tried to do the latter. And the first thing, again, with that, the very upfront, honest approach, it was one of those loans that one gets for charities to run a service. It hadn't worked out. I rang them up. I told them I was new. I'd just started. We've got a debt. I've either got to shut it down unless you can write this debt off for me. Is that something you could do? And I kind of sense that, you know, when these organisations they must have some write-off budget to do that. And they were fantastic because with a very straightforward, honest approach, they came and had a chat with me. They looked at it and they wrote it off, and the charities were able to pick up from there. So that's one example. With COVID, I think with a lot of things there, obviously, some charities. I mean, I think Cycling UK are an incredibly fortuitous position in that they've got income streams which vary from government, local authority, to donors, and it's around about 2 million, if you want to look at it that way. So the split's very good. So a healthy split. For charities that are really dependent on community fundraising, COVID is an absolute disaster. And there's some real tough decisions that those charities are going to have to take. My son is a community fundraiser with a hospice, for example. I mean, they're really struggling. Cycling UK, but by comparison, has been incredibly fortunate, because first thing we did was go to Department of Transport, which is one of our biggest stakeholders, and they said that the grant is good. We know you can't deliver on the way you would have done for the numbers we wanted to reach to help people get more people cycling, but we were able to then redevise different ways in which we could interact with people, with so much in lockdown becoming interactive, but with people being allowed out on their own for a walk, a run, or a cycle. We were able to tap into that. And the mindset, it was fascinating how quickly the mindset changes when the goalposts can't be moved. They are there, they're rigid. You can only now work within that. So you just work within that. And sometimes when there are not any goalposts there, it's all of it, you can be floundering around. It was much easier to focus on what we can and can't do. So number one thing was revisit the budgets. Sat down with the finance and performance committee within the charity, whatever your charity's finance group is called, with yourself and your finance director within your charity, your exec, and chew the fat over what's doable and what's not. Bring that back with your directors, and then that needs to be communicated and cascaded out. And that's really, really important, because one of the things we were absolutely red hot on right from the start was daily updates. We had Microsoft Teams already in place. I was, it kind of really surprised me, because before COVID, Norman, I never used Teams because the world was not open, but we had it as an internal tool. My goodness, was it useful when the catastrophe hit. And then I was talking to colleagues in other charities, some 50 million plus charities didn't have anything like that. And so I thought, gosh, we've got the tools now. Let's use them. Now let's use them properly. So daily updates, and it got to a point in that first 3-4 weeks where I sensed also there was a burnout happening with meeting after meeting after meeting. So then we had to reevaluate that. And again, with management, one of the tests for that was the executive themselves, where some people might come from a different perspective to another. The lines in the sand of how much we need to do can vary, and you have to broker that and lead on that to say, this is, the kind of communication I think we need to be doing going forward. But again, in my personal situation, again, it also demonstrated a tremendous openness and transparency amongst the directors, who were brilliant in the way they worked with each other. It made my job a hell of a lot easier to do.
Yeah, sure. I did. When I just thinking about it from our experience at Cyclopark. So one of the early things that we did, because we had to shut down straight away, and our income is spread over a number of different areas. Some of it relatively secure. Some of it like the customer paying
Yeah.
income for coming to Cyclopark. Obviously, cafe income,
Yeah.
memberships that we
So
had.
what
So
percentage of that, Norman, would suddenly stop?
yeah, it was a good a good chunk. Yeah, I mean, I think more than two-thirds or
Wow.
three-quarters of the income was well, probably around half the income uh, stopped. And
Gosh.
you know, I
See,
could,
we didn't have that. We didn't have that challenge.
yeah.
So
So what?
that's a difference. So what do you do then?
So it's a different, so a completely different challenge. We did a few things. So the first is that we did all the practical stuff about joining the furlough scheme and
Yeah.
government. So the government support was very helpful with that. But what we did as a board and a management team was that we looked at the range of risks that we had. Um, and worked out the extent of those risks and the risks relative to each other as well, and worked out, well, what are our ways of surviving? First of all, can we survive? So the first question was, can we survive this? And we went through a number of iterations of that, where we looked at a budget, kind of a range of different budgets. We went into a worst case budget, looking at cash flow as well. And we're fortunate in our board. We've got a fantastic board, and a couple of people from financial services, and they emphasised absolutely rightly. Let's do what the banks did. Let's financially stress test ourselves to the not what we think is the worst case, but the absolute really nightmare
Scenario. What would
Yeah,
we do?
one of those trustees said to our finance managers, think your darkest thoughts about the money, and use that as your test. And we did that, and by doing that, we realised that we were, even in a really bad scenario, that we would still be here in a year's time. It wouldn't be, the outlook would be pretty grim, but we would still be there, and that made quite a difference to the way that we thought about not only dealing with the current situation, but also about the future as well. It made us realise that we can plan for the future. We should be confident about the future. It gave us more confidence when we started to plan out our phased reopening strategy, and it's now partially reopened. And the next step hopefully will come quite soon, where we open up a bit more. But I think that ability to, and this comes back to resilience, kind of knowing how strong your foundations are,
Yeah.
or not, how weak they
Yeah.
are. But
Yeah.
knowing
Yeah.
what
Or
the
not.
strength
Yeah.
of your foundations helps you then to be able to think about the future and think about it in a different way. But to your point as well about, we were then able, and I did a conference call, video call with them, with all the staff. Some of them were furloughed, some of them were by that time. I was able to say confidently, look, we've tested this. Even in the very worst case scenario, we will still be here in a year's time. So please, we can't say that everyone's
Just
going
hearing
to.
that would have been huge for
Yeah,
them.
and just being realistic to say, right now we're confident about the future. We can't, if it is really bad, we can't rule out lots of
Yeah.
stuff and redundancies and so on. We just,
Yeah.
but at the moment we're nowhere near that, and that was a message that we were able to take out to staff, which I think was really good.